Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well today. Today I have a special video around the UK education system, primarily England. They do differ very slightly in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, so I'm going to be focusing on England specifically and making some comparisons. For those of you, for example, who use the American system and get confused because sometimes we use the same words but they don't mean the same thing, so I'm just going to kind of shed some light and make you aware of the differences. So, first of all, I have put in the comments, by the way, chapter markings for each level. So very quickly, an overview. We've got primary school, we've got secondary school, we've got further education, higher education, and then postgraduate, etc. Those are the five main sections of education in England. Just so you know, I will probably use England and the UK interchangeably in this video, but I am actually referring to England itself, not the UK. So we're starting off with primary school, which is the first level, the youngest when you go into school, first of all, and you start school at the age of 4 to 5, depending on when your birthday falls. So basically, the 4 to 5 years is we call that reception, and that's the equivalent to your America's kindergarten. So some other countries also use the word kindergarten. So for example, when I was living in Germany, they also used kindergarten being a German word, of course, but they used the same word for that same year. So that's the first year before you go into what we call year one. Okay, that's the first proper year of school, as it were. It is still compulsory, mind you, but it's just not called year one. We call it reception. So that's reception, okay, and you'll turn 5 when you're in reception. That's during that year. For those of you, by the way, who are not in the northern hemisphere, maybe some of you from the southern hemisphere, our school year over here goes from September to July. Normally the schools end kind of like middle to 3 weeks through to July, whereas some private schools end earlier, beginning of July, maybe even the end of June. Not normally, it's normally the beginning of July. And then in primary school, you go up 1 year at a time, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 6, okay? And in year 6, that is when you have your last year of primary school. So you are turning 11, okay? 10 to 11 is the end of your primary school, okay? Now there are some schools, not many of them over here, that do have a lower, middle and high school. We don't really tend to use those words too much, but some schools are adopting them. So for example, you would have lower school from, say, year 1 to year 4, then you'd have middle school, which is 5, 6 and 7, and then you'd have high school, which is 8 and above. But the common framework for it is 1 to 6 is primary school, and then 7 to 11 is secondary school. So when you're in year 6, you do what some schools require you to do, what they call an 11 plus, and this is basically if you want to get into a grammar school, which is a selective school based on academic, you know, how clever, I can't think of the word, you know what I mean, I'll edit that out. So that's the 11 plus. You also do what we call SATs as well, which are not, I don't believe they're not the same as SATs. They're different. When you're in year 7, you're now 11. You're in year 7, and you've now started secondary school. All right, and secondary school goes up to year 11 or age 16. This is when you do your GCSEs. Okay. Now, GCSEs are your first major important exams that you take. They include 3 compulsory subjects: English, maths and science. Now those can be divided into different ways. So for example, normally we would have 2 subjects for English. We would have English language and English literature, maths, and then science. And science can be divided either as a single subject, or you can do triple science, biology, chemistry, physics, for example, if you want to, depending on the school that you're in, on what they offer, and also depending on kind of if you're in top sets, for example, you know. But you still have to do maths, English and science. Those are the 3 compulsory GCSE subjects. On top of those, you choose more subjects, which bring you up to 10, sometimes 11 subjects, depending on if it's a double award or not, but mostly 10. So for example, you might want to choose geography, you might want to choose music, you might want to choose design technology, those sorts of things. Okay, so you can choose these options to do on top of your compulsory subjects. Okay, and these options, okay, it's not normally a case of, oh, I can choose anything, because the way most schools do them is they put various subjects in blocks. So for example, you've got to choose one subject from each block, and in block A you've got the languages, in block B you've got the arts, for example, so you've got to choose one from each. It's not an amazing system, because I know from personal experience as well, and I did my GCSEs, that I wanted to choose a particular subject and I couldn't, because I couldn't choose two in the same block. It's a bit complicated, but it's to do with timetabling and making sure that the teachers are available at those times, etc. So those are the GCSEs. Okay, now up until when I was at school, you didn't have to stay in school after the age of 16. You could have left school and gone straight to work. However, now it is compulsory to stay in education or an apprenticeship up until the age of 18. Okay, so when you finish your GCSEs, you can either stay at school and you can do what we call A-levels, and I'll come on to those in a bit more detail in a second, or you can go to what we call college. Now this is one of those words, again, like kindergarten, which we use, but it doesn't mean the same thing. So college is 16 to 18, and it's basically further education is what we call it. So it's like A-levels, but sometimes it can be a bit more practical. For example, they can be vocational subjects, qualifications like nursing or hairdressing, those, for example, which you wouldn't necessarily get with A-levels. It's not to say that you won't, but normally the A-levels are the more academic, in inverted commas, subjects like your English, your maths, your science, those sorts of things. So if you wanted to do a performance course at college, a music performance course, you would have to go to college, because the A-level music would require a lot more of the academic side of music, not just performance. So that's the difference. It's more of a kind of a practical approach to it. So that's what you would do at college. Okay, so you've got your MVQs, you've also got your BTECs. They're basically the same thing. There's a lot of practical element involved. It's very practical heavy. There are some exams and there are pieces of coursework that you might have to complete, but it's not as heavy as A-levels. So in year 12, which is the first year of A-levels, you choose 4 subjects, and you study those for the first year, and then after 1 year you drop one of them. Okay, now generally speaking, because you've chosen, let's say for GCSE, you've chosen geography, French, music, and design technology. For A-levels, it's kind of expected that you would filter those down to 4 subjects. You wouldn't just choose 4 new random subjects. You would filter it and kind of increase the level of expertise that you're in those subjects. So let's say for A-level, you took maths, geography, French, and maybe, I don't know, chemistry, for example, because chemistry we would have done for science. Those would be more specific. You wouldn't just choose 4 new random subjects that you haven't chosen at GCSE, because they build on each other, right? And then after the first year of A-levels, you then drop one of those, okay? So I'm going to drop French, because geography, chemistry, and maths are all, more relevant to each other than French. French seems like a little bit of an odd one out in that group. So I would drop French, and I would choose those other 3. And I would finish the final year with those 3 subjects, and I would get 3 full A-levels, and I would have 1 AS level, okay? Advanced Subsidiary is what that stands for. So that would be your first. You'd have an AS in French, and then you have 3 full A-levels in the other 3 subjects, okay? In your final year is when you then apply, if you want to go to university, you apply for university through UCAS, and those, your degree program is 1 subject. Sometimes you can do joint honours, but most people tend to just focus on 1 subject. So I know in America you choose majors and minors and things like that, and you can do a variety of different things. You have 1 subject. So going along those same subjects, I'm going to choose geography as my undergraduate program. in that geography course, there will be modules, a variety of modules, but they'll all be geography related. So there won't be anything different. Obviously, if you do choose a joint honours programme where, say, you've got geography and maths, you will have geography modules and you have maths modules. But if you choose just one subject, the modules will all be related to geography. Standard university courses, undergraduate university courses, are 3 years. Bachelors, we call them as well, okay? Sometimes you can take a placement year. Sometimes you can take a year abroad, for example. We would call those a sandwich year or a sandwich course, because you'd have your study, placement, study, right? Your last year would be at the end, so we call it a sandwich course. And then for some courses like medicine, veterinary medicine, for example, they would be longer. They'd be 5 years, for example, okay? After you've and that's it. By the way, you don't have to do university. Another option is to, if you want to, just go straight into work, or you can continue down the apprenticeship road. There are lots of options that you can choose instead of just university. Now, I know a lot of schools tend to be very university focused, but there are more options if you ask the right questions. After you've done your undergraduate, so moving on again, we're specialising in geography, we're filtering through. After we've done the undergraduate, we can then move on to do a master's, which is 1 to 2 years, in a subject that is related. Again, it can't be something completely new, because the master's will require that you have what we call a 2-1 or a first class honours degree in a relevant subject. It can't just be a new random master's, for example. It has to be relevant. You can also do a PGCE, which is what I did. It's a teaching qualification, and that effectively allows you to, you're a qualified teacher, you're allowed to teach in schools. My PGCE was in secondary education, so although I can teach legally in primary schools, my training was in secondary education, so I probably wouldn't be as well adapted in a primary school as I would be in a secondary school. So you've got PGCEs, you've got your master's programs, and then if you want to as well, you can do a PhD or a doctorate, which is kind of like the highest level of education. And it really, if you want to teach in a university, for example, lecture in a university, you would need to have a doctorate, or at least be working towards a doctorate in order to work there. So that's the basic sections of education. We've talked a little bit about the exams involved and things like that. I just want to also talk just very briefly about the different types of institution. So we have what we call public schools over here, and state schools. Okay, now public schools, they have a lot of names. You can also call them private schools, you can call them fee-paying schools, independent schools, whatever you want to call them. They're public schools. Basically, it means that the parents pay the tuition for the education. State schools is when the government fund the schools as opposed to the parents or whoever's looking after you. So the government funds the schools, the state schools. So they are called free schools, government funded. And within those there are also things like faith schools, kind of lots of different grammar schools, lots of different schools within those two brackets. So a grammar school, like I mentioned earlier on, is a state school, but you have to have taken that 11 plus to get in, because it's more of a kind of a higher academically. So it is selective in that respect, but it's not an independent school. It can be if it wants to be, but normally they're not. So those are the two types of kind of main types of school, and then the 5 sections of education. I hope that's cleared a few things up. Now remember, this is just England I'm talking about, okay? Scotland is slightly different, Wales is slightly different, and Northern Ireland is slightly different. So I've just focused on England in today's video. But hopefully that will have cleared up a few kind of confusions that you have, terminology. I know, like, Americans use the word college for university, whereas we use college for before university, those 2 years before university. So yeah, that can be a little bit confusing. But I hope that's cleared a few things up for you. And if you have any questions or want me to go into any more detail with anything else, just let me know down in the comments, and I'll be happy to oblige. Yeah, and I've also put these kind of pictures on the side, and a link to this picture as well, just in case anybody wants to have another look. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and please just remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.